Today's guest works inside a brand built with clarity of intent. Polestar emerged from performance engineering and repositioned itself as an electric performance company shaped for a different era of mobility. It draws on Scandinavian design discipline and deep automotive heritage, whilst operating with the decisiveness of a contemporary challenger brand. Joining us is Pär Heyden, Head of Brand and Executive Creative Director. His career moves from the optical precision of Hasselblad to the industrial legacy of Volvo, and now to defining one of the most considered identities in modern automotive. In this conversation, we're going to examine Polestar's founding spirit, what it takes to construct a premium marque with an established framework. We discuss restraint as a competitive strategy in a sector defined by feature escalation, the redefinition of retail through Polestar spaces, and sustainability as a catalyst for better design decisions. We also look ahead to scale software-defined vehicles and the evolving question of where enduring value sits as mobility becomes increasingly digital. Pär, welcome.
Thank you so much. What an introduction.
Pär, you've spent your career at the intersection of sort of precision design and brand building. Amazing brands, brands like Hasselblad, if you're in the world of photography, it's, through to Volvo and now Polestar. You said you work close to the moment where ideas stop being theoretical and start carrying consequences. I love that. I think it's an amazing quote. Can you tell us about the transition from the world of optics to the world of mobility, just to begin with? How did you go on that journey?
Optics to mobility. Yeah. Hasselblad is one of those iconic brands for anyone growing up in Gothenburg, Sweden. And I'm a sort of local Gothenburg boy, so that was always one of those sort of iconic brands. And I remember telling my parents when I joined Hasselblad, and they were so proud. Like, now you've made it. And I've been in the car industry before that, and I've for 15 years or something like that. And now you can finally make something valuable. That's how they thought of it, like a bigger thing than Volvo. And I think one of the nice things there is the attention to detail and the attention to the experience of holding a tool, which a camera actually is. And I remember as a child digging through my dad's stuff, and he had a Hasselblad camera, and just playing with a shutter, what that shutter release did inside the camera, how that felt. It was something that shaped me into a designer, I think. And that attention is something to do with the scale of things, because there are tiny parts inside a camera, and that has to work like a watch does. And in the car industry, so the companies are much greater. The cars are much bigger. Everything, the scale of everything is sort of blown up, sometimes out of proportion. And then you lose that attention to those tiny little parts that make the whole difference. That makes you smile, that makes a kid want to open his dad's closet and just find a tool, because that's what it is. And one of the things that we did at Hasselblad was that over the course of years, they've been sort of lending their brand out to Sony and Motorola and various other brands to make sort of not the professional cameras, but they're trying to make something luxurious, or sort of call it premium or whatever word you want to use. But we wanted to bring it back into that professional tool that you can be really, really proud of, because the experience of that will be something that people will cherish and want to pay a lot of money for, rather than dressing up a mediocre camera with leather and fancy wooden details.
Before we leave the Hasselblad period, because I'm just fascinated I love what you said about the tactility there. I remember being quite disillusioned when everything moved to digital personally, but I embraced it because I knew it was the future. But I remember at one point, having always had Canon um, Canon SLR analog cameras, switching to Canon digital cameras, and then I remember remember selling all of my equipment and switching it all to Nikon because I preferred the click. It was a really weird. It was such a plasticky click on the professional cameras. It gave no satisfaction and it had sort of no feedback, and it didn't have like much depth when you pressed it. Like, and I remember, and it was that tiny thing that it
Yeah.
made the process of just capturing a moment. I wasn't part of it because it didn't feel like a two-way exchange. And it's just the importance of design. I spent a lot of time reflecting on the rationality of selling so many high-end, optic and lenses and, equipment that was quite loved. And it was really came down to that reason.
Yeah. I love that because there's so much of the sort of how you use it, how you connect with the machine that's in those tiny little details, a movement of half a millimeter to to almost nothing. And if that click is not enough, if it doesn't feel right, if the spring mechanism in there is the wrong one, you will feel it. And I think it's fascinating. And then at Hasselblad, I was looking at different metals for the shutter release button because we wanted to make that in a different color set than the body itself. So now it actually turned out to be bright orange aluminium. But we were looking at different warm colored metals like bronzes and stuff because I wanted to make that a personal thing, that it would almost carry your fingerprint after using it a couple of years, that it would be your camera. It's sort of an extension of you and it would almost feel your fingerprint.
So can you tell me, what was the period of time you worked at Hasselblad? When was it? What era? What was their strategy?
It was back in 16, 17, around that time, 15. Yeah. So roughly 10 years ago.
So it was into the digital era.
Yes, absolutely digital. And they'd been struggling for a long, long time. So they had then fresh money coming in, new CEO who then brought me into the company, but it was still struggling. So after like a year or so, it was also sold to the Chinese company called DJI, makes drones. They wanted to do many things, but I think that the company still remains in Gothenburg and it still lives, even though it's probably even smaller now than it was 10 years ago.
So it was a sort of shrine to analog photography in Gothenburg, the best place possible to work, and now it's been acquired by a Chinese drone business. Such is the nature of things. It's amazing how brands that you can't imagine ever living without, that represent the peak of an industry, can. Would you say it's disappeared? Would you say it still has relevance in the world of photography?
I think it does.
Yeah,
I do think it does. There are obviously few photographers who would really need a Hasselblad camera, because everyone is a photographer these days with these guys. But those who think that's not enough, a Nikon or Fuji or whatever is not enough, you want something even better. There are not that many of those guys around. But for those who really want the best, I think there's always going to be Hasselblad.
What drove you then to the world of mobility?
As I mentioned before, I'd been in the car world before.
Yeah,
I had this opportunity with Hasselblad, so it was actually then an opportunity that my previous boss, who then happened to become the CEO of Polestar, Thomas Engelhardt, he presented me this opportunity to run the brand Hasselblad, which was something that we'd discussed earlier as well, because Volvo bought the rights to the brand a few years earlier, and we were discussing, what would Volvo do with this? And so we shaped that from the ground up, more or less, and very, very fortunate to be part of launching and shaping a car brand from ground up. I don't know how many people in the world has had that opportunity, and it's one of those things that would sit with me close to my heart for the rest of my life, I think.
Can you expand on that? Actually, what was Polestar's history?
Polestar was actually founded back in the 90s as a pure racing team, actually. They were racing the touring car championships around Europe. Most of the time, they were using Volvos, which they tuned and striped bright blue, cyan blue. And you could always, for a long time at least, buy tuning kits from Polestar to put on your normal Volvo. So there are many Volvos driving around with blue chips in the front. So that was what it was. And that racing DNA, I would say, was something that we wanted to keep. But moving into the future, we've always said that you want to enjoy driving, and that thrill of using a car the way cars should be used, without having that guilt, without having the feeling that I'm doing something bad, that taking the long route when you go grocery shopping or picking up the kids, just because you enjoy that moment in the car. It's something that we want to package to people and want to sell that, because this is something valuable, we think. And over all those years before this opportunity with Polestar, it always felt a bit sad when relatives and friends were asking me, so you're in the car industry, which car should I drive? Which car should I buy? What's the best one? Because I was never really proud enough to say that, okay, this is an awesome drive, but it's also not ruining the environment that we live in. So this was, for the first time, an opportunity for us to do both, and really to try, can we make these two worlds meet? I think that was sort of the basics behind it.
Because it's often sort of described as a bit of a tech startup born from, its 100-year-old heritage. And, in the early days, Matt, to touch on sort of what you've just mentioned, what was the specific taboo or convention of the car industry that you wanted to break?
I don't know if we looked at taboos, but that notion that cars are bad, car companies are the bad guys in society. Can we somehow change that? I think that was sort of one of the fundamental. I remember pictures that we had of car sort of traffic jam situations, and all the tailpipe emissions coming out, and it was all it was all bad and dirty. And can we offer something crisp, clean? Can we offer a brighter future? Can we give people hope that the car industry isn't completely off? Because we felt that over the previous 10, 15 years, the only car company that offered something different was Tesla. Because all the other guys, they've been trying and failing with electric cars, and the only ones really succeeding was Tesla. And we never set out to beat Tesla. That would be ridiculous. We were so happy that Tesla were doing their thing, because they just opened the door and
They're
okay,
market making, aren't they? It's quite useful actually to just open the aperture.
Yeah. So they did that, and that's great. Now there's plenty of room for us to do something else than Tesla, obviously. And then that's what we did. And tech startup, I'm not sure that tech is really where we started. I think we wanted to explain the technology in our cars. I think where we come from is design. Actually, I think we're born and raised designers and creatives, but it's all boring hearing designers talk about design. So the first thing it was like, okay, the first presentation of the Polestar 1, let's not talk about design at all. Let's talk and explain the tech inside the car, but let's use design tools to do that. So we created this presentation and all these images and all this material and films and whatnot that we designed in to the last pixel. The last micron of that was sort of designed as detailed as a camera shutter. But it was not a word about design.
Okay, it's interesting. But you are a designer and a creative and a brand and a brand guy, and you've led everything from the architecture of Polestar spaces to, you know, the very typography on the cars. So do you consider yourself a car guy, or do you consider
No,
yourself a details guy who happens to be making the cars?
definitely not a car guy. And I think most car designers would be generally car guys that happen to be good at drawing school or something like that. But I didn't even study car design. And I'm more from the industrial design or interaction design field, and studied typography. Yes. And growing up, my parents thought I was going to be an architect, so they gave me some drawing pads and stuff. And I designed houses in my teens. I loved doing that, but I was always fairly broad in my sort of creative. Uh, I don't know what to call it, but creatively very, very broad, from music to architecture to typography to whatever. But never really cars. It would just happen to be cars in the end.
But it was like, it's just quite interesting listening to you talk, because it's like coming at it from different angles, but arriving at a similar industry. And I think it's like a narrative of the times in a way, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, I think so. And when we started shaping Polestar, one of the things the car industry has its set ways of doing things, talking and behaving. And we thought it would be sort of the most natural thing in the world to do not the opposite, just because we want to be provocative, but there's so much opportunity here. If you were to approach it like you would with a fashion brand or something completely different, where nowadays those creative directors at fashion brands, they don't only design the fashion or the collections that they show every 6 months or so, but the entire brands are shaped by these guys and women. And there are so few people in the car world that see brands in the same way. If the design teams in the car world are led by car geeks, those kids grew up with cars and were good at drawing, then would they look upon the entire brand in that same way? I don't think so. I think that the creative director role is a much, much wider role. And I don't think that there are many people in the car world that could do that journey, that transformation, that complete universe of experiences that you would see in the fashion world. And that was something that we at least try to achieve with Polestar.
There's a lot of emotion in the world of car, in the automotive world, and combustion and horsepower and what it represents. And there's a lot of connotation around, the kinetic energy of the whole thing and how it speaks to genders and how it's, how the design becomes sort of skeuomorphic is the wrong word, but representative of, and it's difficult to break yourself apart from all of those things, because actually, like an electric car, like a combustion car is designed a certain way, and you accidentally fall in love with it but it had to be designed that way to be aerodynamic, to allow for its engine, to allow for its drive shaft, to allow for things that then become coveted norms that you replicate but don't have to. And you start replicating and they become coveted, but for reasons the design actually isn't solving anything, it's just styling. And so what's interesting is coming at it from a different industry, and design is about solving problems, right? So it's like, what problems are we actually trying to solve and then how can you make something covetous again, but because it solves those problems really well, rather than simply trying to recreate an aesthetic or a sensory experience because of its symbolic value. Does that make sense?
Yeah. But I think there is something in that view of the customer, I think, where I always thought that customers deserved better. They deserve better cars. They have deserved better experiences, better advertising, even. Well, I felt dumb looking at car ads and the car interfaces and everything. Like, my God, we should by now be able to do better than this. It's hard though.
Can we talk about interface? Because many years of engineering IP has now been, disrupted by what is essentially an interior, a battery, a body kit, and importantly, an interface. And so, and I watch the automotive industry from afar, sort of rescinding control of its interface to big tech. And so, can you just talk to what those tensions look like in the automotive industry? And actually, those who did design interfaces, by the way, I couldn't believe how poor the design quality was, given how high the design quality of the actual automobiles were. I mean, it was startling.
Yeah, and that's fascinating, actually. If you would back up like 20, 25 years, like within early millennium, I think car interiors were still filled with buttons and switches. We were describing it as someone poured out a box of battered all sorts of licorice candy all over the place. There were buttons and switches for everything. And you would have to have different languages and sometimes symbols and sometimes a word with a symbol, because in some countries they wouldn't understand the word. In the US, they wouldn't understand the symbol. So I think what happened over the years is that the car companies have been trying to go away from all that and to create an interior which is way more flexible. And when the iPads and iPhones came about, then I think everyone's like, yeah, now this could be the future. And then they went bonkers and added bigger and bigger screens. I don't know what they plan to fill them with. They have the weirdest shapes and the weirdest content, and I don't get that at all. So I think what we were trying to do with Polestar was to really bring it down into sort of the basics, because we had established this graphic design style of ours and the typography that was sort of becoming clearer and clearer, and just introducing a grid system on a screen. Would that be a strange thing to do? Well, it proved to be, and now it's there and it works fine if you want to use it. But I don't think that many other car brands see this screen like that. It's something else. We talked a lot about the craftsmanship in making an interior, and typically that would be leather and wooden pieces and so on. And when you start talking about the digital craftsmanship, the stuff that you would always see from Apple, those symbols and icons and parts of the user interface that's so yummy that you want to eat them. Why can't we spend as much time on those details?
Well, and the physics.
Again, yeah.
The micro interactions, and they are the replacement for the tactility, right? And they're often just marginalized, and actually they're actually missing. And all of the major car manufacturers have appalling interfaces, like embarrassing.
Yeah. I also know how difficult it is. Even just trying to get typography to sit properly, because there's something in the way these interfaces are programmed or built. I don't know really what it is.
What is broken about the format, and what does replacing salespeople with specialists change in what I'm going to call a power dynamic, actually?
I think, again, it was coming back to shaping the brand, and what we saw being broken in the car industry is how you treat customers. Now, I know there are plenty of awesome car salesmen out there, but the traditional caricature of a car salesman is these loud people who always would trick you into buying something that you didn't need, and those balloons and ribbon bargains and all those things that surround a car purchase, which were just obscene in a way. If you look at other industries, again, luxury fashion or watches or whatever, they would never treat a customer like that. So why can't we? Why can't we give customers that respect? Can't we really show our product, and by respect, then explain it properly? If we give our staff the proper training, they would be product specialists. They would be able then to answer any question that the customers ask. They would be more than just trying to persuade you into buying something you don't want or don't need.
You've spoken before about wanting spaces that sharpen or heighten the senses rather than soothing them, which I think is interesting. Why should a brand encounter create this like heightened awareness rather than just this sort of subdued familiarity? What does that shift do to perception of value?
I think it is a reflection of our view of our products. We view our cars as pieces of art, almost, at least pieces of design that should be considered valuable pieces of design. And then how do you display them? Well, it's something gallery-like. You don't bring show art in home environments. You don't do that. You want proper lighting. You want a proper setting where the car can really shine. And many retail experiences these days, they look a bit homey. The car brands trying to make a living room kind of environment where they give you coffee, they want you to sit down and relax and allow you to be not fooled into buying the wrong car, but where you sort of feel like are they trying to hide something? Because we really want people to pay attention, because we believe that this car is something special. This is doing something that no car before it has done. It's something that deserves your attention. And just coming into the lighting, it's such a fundamental thing. Every car is designed to stand on a dark piece of land, is a tarmac or concrete, whatever, and lit by the sky above it. When you come into a car dealership, obviously the sky is gone, and then they replace it with myriads of spotlights, and it makes the car look like it's got dandruff. It's got spots everywhere. So one of the first things is that we brought in we call it the light ceiling, which is like a soft box in a photo studio. It also creates a package for the car. So it's like a jewelry box almost. The car stands on concrete in our cases, and it has this lighting ceiling on top of it. And that sort of creates that jewelry box, and it sort of tells you as a customer, this is the jewel, this is the valuable object in here, this is what you should be paying attention to. And I haven't seen any other car brand do anything like that.
Yeah.
It's fundamental. How do you light a car? Any car photography, you should always do.
That's interesting. When you launched the Polestar 4, it involved 90,000 tulips in Shanghai and a parachute being torn off a car at speed in the desert. It was not exactly understated. How do you balance that sort of high concept? It's like almost performance art with the commercial reality of selling a volume product. I mean, how did you think about it all? How does it? What was the like? Talk us through. How you saw it as an expression of a brand.
So it's all to do with the Polestar 4. The first one was in Shanghai 2023, where we introduced and showed the car the first time. And I think it's to do with minimalism again, because normally a car show is just packed with cars and car brands are doing more or less the same thing. So we had a discussion. How do we really make this car stand out? And you could then again start talking about features, and we can start talking about the electric drivetrain, and we can do things about that. But from the beginning, this is a designer brand. So why couldn't we, just for once, just focus on the beauty of it? So could we strip away all the other cars? So we strip away the desperate trying to sell the regular cars and just focus on the new one. So just the beauty of this car. So can we bounce tons of ideas, but what if we only had 2 cars on the stand? What do we do around it? How do we really bring them or elevate them into something really special? So they're a very robotic and white and shiny object. So what if we contrast that with something very organic, something living, and we were looking at meadows and growing things, and in the end it ended up being red tulips, mostly because of it is really hard to find something organic that could stand the environment in a hole like that. But then we also wanted to really create that environment which not flat, which is something that sort of limits your access to these cars, that sort of unseen and almost cinematic in a way. But I think everyone who were at that show would tell you that the first thing you noticed was the smell. And you could scent those flowers 100 meters away. 90,000 tulips, you can smell that, even if a bouquet at home doesn't give you that much, but 90,000 of them. And it was amazing. And you'd have all these people standing there taking pictures of the tulips and just enjoying the beauty of the thing. And then, of course, just focusing on 2 cars on the center stage, it was just, and it didn't pull attention from the cars, I think, because there were only 2 cars there to look at. I think any other stand with 20 or 30 cars is much harder to cut through. And now we had only 2 cars, and it was pretty clear. The second one is the TV commercial that followed that, and it was really a story about speed and the performance of the car, and how do we illustrate that. And we've had many creative campaigns regarding the joy to drive and the speed and the performance of the car. So how do we capture that? So I think this whole idea comes from that. How can you capture speed and motion in a still image? Well, that would be motion blurs, stuff like that, or something flying off of it. So that's where that idea comes from. And then we just, again, reduced it into the most sort of simple format. And there's this car that lands from outer space, and the parachute then leaves it. And it just, again, distilling down, removing all the other aspects of it. Because then we said, okay, we don't have to talk about the beauty. We've already done that. Tick that box.
What do you think, as EVs become more software driven, and what we just spoke about continues to happen, sort of commodification, where do you think the value will be?
Well, I think there are the different types of value. I think when it comes to the product specific values, that sort of, the experience and the craft and the materials and the fit and finish and the design and sort of horsepower, if you want to use that expression. Yeah, that's one thing. And out of all that, I think the total experience of having a smooth car ownership is crucial. But I also think that often misunderstood or misused is the social value of a car, and how certain brands can charge so much money for that value, that the status they bring, and it's completely disconnected from the physical sort of parameters of the car. Take a brand like Porsche. just parking a Porsche next to your neighbor's whatever Toyota or something, where the technical setup, you just compare the specifications, aren't dramatically different. But the value it brings to you in a social context, it is phenomenal. And I think that is something that I think at least the older OEMs will wake up one day and say, hey, we might have missed something here just looking at the car specs.
A bit like what happened with Apple and computing.
Exactly. Yeah. And it sort of opens the door to a world where they can no longer talk about premium, because I believe premium is a way of saying, yeah, you got more features, and then by that the price goes up. But in what I would call then a luxury or another beyond premium segment is where the value is set by other things than just a number of features.
A lot of them quite transparently just share drivetrains.
Yeah.
And if you look down a motorway, depressingly, most cars look the same. And, they just look like different bodies, and that it looks so non-engineered these days, that it almost just looks like they're wearing jackets.
Yeah. And part of that is legislation and rules and restrictions from left, right, and center. I mean, it's sometimes a wonder that you can tell cars apart.
Really, is that the reason? You think about the character of a BMW from the 80s, or just the iconic star of a Mercedes, that actually just wasn't embedded into, a grille that serves no purpose, but rather actually, sat proudly above the bonnet. You think about, the lines of a Porsche, which I think has been so poorly translated into an SUV context that it just looks sheepish almost, and you think about those things, and then you just look at how the character has been eroded. I mean, even Aston's SUV, and so I wonder really where, and a lot of the interiors are poorly made and the interfaces are terrible, and that I find really extraordinary, because there's not even seemingly a desire to compete on. I don't know, what else could you do with that time or that space? And it feels like no one's doing anything particularly innovative at the moment, but maybe that will change. We always ask our guests the same 4 questions, and I'm going to ask the first one now, and that is, what would you most like to change about your industry?
What I mean, I've touched upon it a couple of times, and I still believe there is a way the car industry is addressing its customers. I think we should be giving them more respect. I think we should treat them better. And it starts with the communication to them, the experiences over time, and the product we deliver to them. I think they deserve better.
What concerns you most about the world we're leaving the kids?
Right now, the uncertainty of where things are going with respect to AI and the technical and it's something where unlike my parents, I can't tell my kids this is what's going to happen. Grow up and do this. My kids are creative. They do build things and they make things. I'm immensely proud to see that some of that interest has been passed down through from my genes. But I don't know what to tell them to do. I won't tell them to be an architect. I won't tell them to be a programmer. I don't know.
Just don't tell your kids what to do.
Yeah. No, maybe not.
What's the most exciting thing for you in the next 5 years?
It's going to be exciting to see my kids grow up and see where that creativity takes them. I am genuinely interested in that, and they inspire me every day, despite the technical stuff. Kids, I learn from them, and I really enjoy hanging out with them, drawing, building Legos, and making spaceships and whatnot.
Pär, on that delightful note, I will thank you for your time. It's been such a joy speaking to you.
Thank you so much.